G'day legends. In this video, what we're going to be doing is setting up a session template. Now this can be used as a mixing template, but it can also just be used as a starting point for when you start recording a song. So whenever I have a band or an artist coming to the studio, this is what I'm going to load up. And now I've been meaning to redo my session template and change a few things around. So let's do it together, and then you can follow along and you can build the exact same template that I use. Or if you want to skip doing all the hard work, I'm going to have a copy of this up on my website as well. It'll be a couple of bucks. Save yourself the time. You can go and grab a copy of that if you want. There'll be a link to that in the description below. Now this template is going to cover basically like your generic kind of band sort of thing, like anything we kind of expect, like drums, bass, guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, lead guitars, pianos, some synth, some strings, vocals, backing vocals, harmonies, gang vocals, I don't know, anything like that. Just like, it's going to cover a wide variety of stuff. I've written a bit of a list that I'm going to follow. And it's going to have a whole bunch of routing set up so that when you do want to start mixing and you do want to start adding extra processing and effects, it's already going to be mostly set up for you. So it's just a matter of loading plugins and starting to use those things. So let's get going. Now, all we need to do is open up Logic and create a new project. And so to start with, what I want to do is come up to the top here and we're going to right click up on the transport bar and we're going to go to customize control bar and display. Now, I'm not sure what yours will look like. Maybe it'll be on beats and project or beats and time. Change it to custom. Let's click on custom. Now check out all the things that I have selected here and you can copy those settings or you can go through and select your own things that you want to see up the top here. For me, I like to have low latency mode so that when I have plugins running in a session and I'm tracking, I can click that on and the plugins no longer are creating latency and issues. Just check anything that you think is going to be important for you to have a smooth session. Sample rate or punch locators is pretty important to me, so make sure you have that up there so that you can select your sample rate that you want to work in. For me, it's generally 48 kilohertz. So we're already in 48 kilohertz. But if you need to change this to something else, just click on it and select the sample rate that you're going to be working in. And you can always come up and change this at the start of a session. If you're about to start mixing a song, you can change it into your sample rate and then drag your files in. Logic's usually pretty clever, and if you drag files into a session, it'll ask if you want to change the sample rate. Let's get going. So let's make some drum tracks. Now I'm just going to duplicate a few of these. So I'm just pressing Command D. So let's start with the kick. And then let's have kick 2 in case we have 2 kick mics. And then let's have kick out. So sometimes you might have a kick at the whole of your bass drum. You might have a boundary mic inside the bass drum. And then you may have an outside mic like a condenser mic on the front of the bass drum. So that gives us sort of our 3 kick mic options there. Let's get a snare top, maybe a snare 2 in case we have 2 mics on the snare, and then a snare bottom. I like to write everything in capitals, so I apologize if you don't like that, but I like it nice and big and clear. Now for me, the next thing I like to do is add toms. Generally, most people are going to have 3 toms. Occasionally, you'll get someone who has more. You can always add more channels. So let's keep it pretty simple. And then let's go our hi-hats. And then we're going to go ride. We're going to need a couple more channels. So let's add a couple extra. Overhead left, overhead right. Going to have some stereo room mics and then a mono room. Now that's typically my kind of setup on the drums. Usually I only have 2 toms, but let's chuck the 3 in there for now, and then we can always scrap that mic if we don't need it. So let's give these some nice identifying pitches. Let's right click on these and go up to drums, and then let's just pick our drum kit for all of these. So now whenever we right click on one of these, it goes straight to the drums and it's easy to select what we want. All right, let's give these a nice color. I usually like to keep them kind of nice and bright and pink. Now let's add some groups to these. All our kicks are gonna go to bus 1, snares to bus 2, toms to bus 3. I'm gonna leave the hi-hats and the ride just to the stereo out at the moment. Overheads left and right to bus 4, and then all of our rooms to bus 5. Now we can come and label these. We're gonna have kick, snare, toms, overhead, room. Now we just wanna highlight all of these buses, right click on them, create track. So now these buses appear in our global window and we can line them up where we want them. So let's drag the kick up next to our kicks, snare next to our snares, toms next to our toms, overhead next to overheads, and room next to our room. Oh, and it just started pouring outside, so sorry if there's a bit of noise now coming in the mic. We've got some pretty bad weather going on this week. Now what we're going to do is create a couple of sends off of these. So we're going to click on our kick, snare, toms, overhead, and our room bus, as well as our hi-hats and our ride. We'll get that in there as well. and let's create a send. So bus 6, let's create another send, bus 7, and one more, bus 8. So our first one's going to be our parallel compression. So let's just call it our crusher, because generally we slam it with compression. Next one's going to be saturation, saturate, and then our next one will be an exciter, so excite. So we've got 3 little flavors here for parallel processing. Highlight them, right click, and what we're going to do is grab these and drag them up the top. Now you might want to color these a little differently so that we can distinguish them. Let's highlight these buses and make them like a dark pink. That way we can tell these are our effects and these are just our groups for our drum sounds. Now I'm not going to load any plugins on these at the moment. This is just getting it all set up. Now we also want to make another send off of our snare, maybe another 2 sends off of this actually. And then we're going to make a send off of our toms. And this is going to be snare short reverb, snare long, and then tom verb. So a couple of reverbs here. And then again, highlight, create track. And then we're going to put these next to the snare. I like to put it just above the snare, above the toms. And so we've got a couple of options there now for where we can send some reverb. Now what we're going to do is come into our global window and we're going to click on the top one of these, hold down shift and click on the bottom, highlight them all, and then we're going to right click, create track stack. And then we're going to select summing stack and hit create. Now we've got a stack for our drums. We'll just label this drums at the top. Put a nice little picture of the drum kit up here. And we've got a dark pink at the top there, which is all right. Otherwise we can go to our bright pink if we want. Might use that one. And then we're almost done. From our drum bus, we're going to create one more send, bus 13. And this is going to be our drum reverb for the overall kit. So we want to put a little bit of reverb on everything. This is where we're going to do it. Call this drum verb. And we're just going to leave this one where it is. We don't want to put it in the global window. It's fine just over here in its own little space. So now you can close that down, and that is our drums. Now the next thing that's really important would be setting up your inputs to match your interface and how you are going to run your mics into the session. And obviously it's going to be different from user to user. So I'm just going to leave them all as input 1, and then you guys can come up the top and select the inputs for your mics that correlate with your interface, and away you go. Now for all you guys who don't record drums, we are actually going to come back and we're going to set up for MIDI drums as well. So we'll come back and do that at the end, and I'll set it up in a similar way as if we were using some MIDI drums that had a multi out, and I'll show you how I would set all of that up. Now let's create another audio file. This one is going to be our bass. Now let's duplicate this. We're going to have a couple of options here. First one's going to be our DI. And the next one will be for like a bass preamp or like a bass head. So we can have bass pre. For me, that'll be something like a Sans amp. Kind of always have this sitting around the desk ready to go. And then the next one is going to be our bass cab. So if you like to record with a bass cab, there's an option to chuck a mic on. And if you want to do 2 mics, you can obviously duplicate and add a second mic. For me, I rarely am recording bass cabs. So, you know, I'm just putting that there to kind of cover all bases here, but it's not very often that I have people bringing in bass cabs. They're pretty happy to track DI most of the time. Okay, let's give these a nice little color, maybe like a dark purple, and then let's give them a little picture. Now let's set up a parallel send for the bass as well. And this one is going to be for distortion, saturation, anything kind of like that where you want to add a little bit of dirt to the bass. Right click, create track, let's drag that up to the top, and then let's highlight all of these, right click, create track stack. Label it bass and change our picture. Let's make sure we color this the same as the others. So if you're like me, I always like to get the bass with a little bit of dirt on it. Sometimes you can do it with the plugins you're using, but sometimes it's cool to do it in parallel as well. So you could send the signal into this, have some sort of saturation or distortion plugin, add a bit of grit, and then blend to taste. And then you can do any kind of final mixing on your bass bus. So pretty simple for the bass. I generally don't like to use reverb and sends like that on the bass, but obviously you can go forth and go crazy when you start mixing and add any of that stuff later. Okay, so for our next one, let's cover electric guitars. This is going to be a pretty big one. There's going to be a lot of channels for this. So I want to have 3 channels per guitar, and I want to make 8 rhythm guitar tracks. So 8 times 3, 24. That's fast math. Number of tracks to create, 24. I'm just going to call this guitar 1, and then guitar 1, but it's going to be for a second mic. And then this is going to be guitar 1 DI. Then we'll go forth and do the same for 8 of these. Okay, so you're probably like, that's a lot of guitar tracks just for like rhythm guitars. And yeah, sometimes you get projects and people just keep adding stuff. So it's always better to have more tracks and less, because then you have to start making channels, duplicating stuff and adding groups. It can get pretty annoying and time consuming. So you don't want to be wasting time when you're tracking and doing things. You just want to be able to hit record and go. You might even use all of these. Sometimes you have a couple of cleans, a couple of distorted, you might quad track things. They fill up pretty quick. Highlight, right click, and let's get a guitar in here. Now I'm going to make these a nice dark blue kind of color like down here. Yeah. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to find all our DI signals and we're just going to hit mute on them. Now what I want to do is select the first 3, guitar 1, and we're going to go to bus 16. And then we're going to go and keep doing this until we grab all of these guitars. Okay. Now over here, we can label these, and since they're all the same name, we can highlight all of these, hold down Shift, double click the first one, and now write in the name, guitar 1, hit enter. Boom, guitar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nice. Now, while we're here, this is important. Come up the top, click on this little symbol here and turn it into mono channels. Now go create track. Now I'll explain that in just a second. Let's just drag these up next to our corresponding guitars. So let's put them above like we did with everything else, like the drums and the bass. Okay, this is looking pretty cool. Now let's color these as well. Just give them like a slightly lighter color. So the reason I've created these as mono channels is this is where we're actually going to be mixing the guitars from. Now I've set this up as if you're recording a guitar amp and you usually put 2 mics on an amp. So that means on these first 2 channels, that's where we're going to be getting our blend. So we can blend our 2 mics to taste, do any EQ, compression, anything that we want to do on the individual channels, but then ultimately blending them together onto this channel here. And then we can do our panning and any processing of both mics together. Now with the DI signal, because I always record a clean DI of the guitar before the guitar amp and pedals and stuff like that, so that in the case where we need to reamp the guitar or maybe use some plugins instead because we're not happy with the tone that we captured, then you could just change the output of this to your guitar bus, which we haven't made yet. So once we've made a guitar track stack, you could just change the output to the guitar track stack, and then it won't have to go through any of this routing. But for now, we'll just leave it all kind of like grouped together as is. Now let's grab all of these groups and let's create a send. Now we're going to create 2 sends. We're going to have a reverb and a delay. So let's just call this guitar rev, guitar delay. Highlight, right click, create track, and let's drag these up the top. So these are just going to be like kind of generic reverb and delay, just if you need to kind of cushion your guitar sound a little bit. You can just add a little bit here and sprinkle some on your guitars. Now let's grab all of these, right click, create track stack, summing stack, done. Now we've got our guitars. I'm just going to call them guitars, just trying to keep things pretty simple with this. And you know, I'm choosing generic names like guitar 1, guitar 2, rather than saying clean 1 and clean 2 or like distorted 1, distorted 2. If we just call them guitar 1, it just makes it easy for us. You can always relabel that stuff later. Now let's make our track stack the same color as our guitars. That nice dark blue. And then let's create 1 send off of here, just in case we just want to use a reverb on all the guitars and not worry about doing individual reverbs like we have set up here. Let's just set up another reverb over here, call this guitar verb. So it's just good to have the option there. You don't have to use it, but just get it set up, it's done. Now, typically I like to just sort of have this already set up. So I'm going to pan guitar 1 and 2 left and right, and the same for the others. Just so there's like a basic vibe going on here, and then you can change the panning at any point, but I know I'm going to be double tracking guitars, so I might as well just have them panned out, ready to go. And we're panning on the channel that the 2 mics are summed to. We're not panning on the individual tracks here because they're being sent to a mono bus. So if you pan them, it won't do anything. It'll probably just make them sound quieter because you'll lose signal. So just leave them all centered. I also like to just turn the DIs down so I know that they're DIs. When I glance at the faders, I know, okay, those channels are DIs. And again, let's just leave all the inputs as input 1. You guys can go through and assign the inputs. I mean, for this kind of thing, I might just change every second guitar to input 2 because that makes sense. If you're using a 2-track interface, then that'll be already set up for you. Mic 1, mic 2. And hopefully you've got more than 2 channels so that you can do a DI as well. And then you could have that input 3. But go through and change all this stuff to what your setup's like. We're looking pretty good. We've got drums, bass, and guitars kind of set up already. This is looking nice, but we've still got a bit to go. Now let's set up some lead guitar channels. So let's make enough tracks for 8 lead guitars. So again, we want 3 tracks, 2 mics, 1 DI. So another 24 channels. And again, let's just label these lead 1 to lead 8. All right, looking pretty good. This is very organized and looking nice. If you guys are enjoying this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Those little things go a massive way in showing your support. And if you're a part of any groups like Facebook groups where you share tips and audio knowledge, if you think this stuff is useful to anyone out there, make sure you hit that share button as well and share these videos with your audio mates. And one thing we might start doing now, I was going to do it towards the end, but we'll start chipping away at it now, is we're going to assign some groups as well. So on our drums, we're going to come back and select all our channels. So they're all highlighted. And then we're going to click on this little group section here, this little blank window, and we're going to go group 1. Now this little pop-up menu appears. Just drag this down a bit. Now we're going to change some settings here. We're going to put it into editing, quantize locked audio. And that's it. So that means that whenever we cut a region and drag it around, all the regions get cut, all the regions get moved. If we start using flex time, they're all locked together. It means you don't get any phase problems with the drums moving out of alignment with each other. So very important. And you can always turn your groups off later. I mean, you can come through and highlight them and just go no group, or you can deactivate all your groups by pressing Command G. It turns groups off. Now we'll do the same on our bass. Let's come over to bass, highlight these and go group 2. And then same thing, quantizing and editing, and then we'll just decheck everything else. Now we can name these groups too if we want to make it nice and pretty, drums. And then let's come over to our guitars. Now we're going to group these individually. So group 3, group 4, group 5. So we're going to end up with a lot of groups. But whenever you're using like a multi-mic setup, you really want to have this stuff grouped and locked together so that problems can't happen. Things can't go out of phase. You don't cut and nudge something and then all of a sudden you've got comb filtering happening. Like, you don't want that. So using groups is very important. Now I'm just going to go through all of those and label them accordingly. So guitar 1, and same deal. Just go through and change all of these editing settings. So click on each group and go in and make the same changes. So you can see how important it is to have a session like this set up, because this stuff, it's just monotonous and it takes a lot of time, and it's a waste of session time too if you're working with an artist. You really just want to have all this stuff done and it's just there ready to go, and you don't have to be making groups, you don't have to be track stacking stuff, you don't have to be creating channels and adding inputs. You want to have it all ready to go, and that just makes the session all about making the music. All right, and then we're going to do our lead guitars as well. Let's just go through, label them, and change these settings. Okay, awesome. They're all sorted. So very, very boring stuff. So I'm going to skip through all that editing stuff so you don't have to watch it. Now, probably a pretty important thing to do right now, because we have been working on this for a moment. Let's save our template in case the session crashes and we lose it, because that would be pretty sad. So let's come up to File and go down to Save as Template. And you can see we've got a couple of templates here already, and I'm going to call this Spinlight Studio. Now we can save over that again later once we get a bit more done, but at least this stuff's saved and we got it saved. So if you've been following along, make sure you do a little save along the way, just in case your session crashes and you lose all this hard work. Let's keep going. So the next thing I want to add is some more guitars. We're going to go to some acoustic guitars. So with acoustic guitars, I generally like to use 2 mics so I can do a stereo configuration, or I can put 2 mics together and blend them. But I also like to grab the DI as well, just in case. You never know. Half the time, I rarely ever use the DI in acoustic guitars, but sometimes it's surprising. Some of them sound pretty good. So similar thing, let's make 4 acoustic guitar channels. So 4 times 3 is 12. Fast math. Let's keep it simple. Let's go AC1, 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 DI. Let's give these a nice little picture. Acoustic guitar. Let's give these a nice little color. Okay, now same thing. We're going to group these. So let's go the first 3 mics together, plus 38. Starting to get the feel for the pattern here. Okay, I'm going to arrange these as if they're like stereo configuration. So we'll just pan this hard left and right. And then obviously you can change that. If you wanted to have 2 mics and just blend them together, you could just mono it and then just blend them to taste. Okay, and then we'll come over here and label these. And then create track. And then let's drag these into their right place. While we're here, let's add these groups. Same deal, just change it to editing and make sure when we're using these multi-mics that it's all locked. Let's set up 2 little sends here. Okay, we're gonna have some reverb, so AC verb, and then a parallel compression. We'll just call it AC comp, acoustic compression, and that can just be somewhere where we can add some hard compression and blend it in with our acoustic guitar. It can sound pretty nice. So let's create a track. drag these up to the top of our acoustics, and then highlight them all, create track stack. Let's make sure we color this the same. I'm just gonna call this acoustic, just so it's like nice and clear that it's acoustic guitar. Okay, and from our acoustic, let's just add another send. So a reverb for all of these, if we wanna have a reverb that we can just send everything to rather than playing with the individual ones. Let's just do a group reverb over here, AC verb. Okay, this is looking pretty nice. Let's change our picture. Beautiful. Man, we've got a few tracks going now, 122. Now the thing is, if you open this session up and you're like, I'm not gonna use acoustic guitars, you literally just click on this track stack and hit delete and it's gone. Boom, gone. You don't have to have it in your session. We'll Command Z that and hope it comes back. All right, cool. So now I've been doing heaps of country stuff, so I'm gonna include a couple little like rootsy sounds. Gonna set up a couple little banjo tracks and some mandolin tracks as well. Typically with the banjo, I generally only use like one mic, or if I use two, I'm blending it. I'm really trying to do like a stereo thing on the banjo. Not that you can't, you definitely can. But a lot of times in a track, I just want to get it and kind of like put it off in one direction a little bit. And yeah, stereo miking it, I don't know, it's just not something I do very often. So I will set it up with like the option for two mics, but then it can just be like simplified down to one. Now, not a lot of banjos have a DI, but some of them do. So I'm going to include that in there, but you can always just delete these channels if you don't need them. So I'm going to make 2 banjo tracks. So I need 6 tracks here. All right, now we're going to do the exact same thing, but now for mandolin. So I'm just going to skip over this, but I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Now the banjo and the mandolin, we're going to send this to our acoustic reverb as well. Just keep them on that same kind of vibe. So that if we want to have a reverb for all of our acoustic instruments, we can send them to the same place. So that's going to the AC verb. So with these groups, like the acoustic guitars, the banjos, the mandolins, I'm going to leave the groups that these mics are all summed to as stereo. But if you do find that you're not using a stereo configuration like left and right, and then you can process it here. If you're not doing that and you're doing like a mono kind of thing, or you just use one channel, probably don't process on this stereo channel. Or if you do, just change it to a mono channel by clicking up the top. But even if you found yourself not using these channels, like or you just used one mic on the mandolin, you could just change the output of this to the mandolin track stack, bus 53. And you could get rid of all the other stuff. But this is just kind of like being really thorough, having all the options here. If you were to do a stereo mic, then you could have it panned like that, and then you could do your processing here. Or if you were blending 2 mics, you could blend them together, put this into mono, and process it that way, as long as it's in phase. That's always important. That's why we're doing these phase locking things. So as long as you're getting your mic placements right and the phase sounds good, there's no problems there. But if you did need to shift the audio files to get them back into phase, you would just turn your groups off, Command G, drag things around until they're locked in place, and then put the groups back on. It is important when things are in groups that the start is the same. So if you did kind of nudge your audio files around and you know one of them starts a little bit earlier than the other, just go through and chop the beginnings so they all start from the same point. It seems to mess things up when you try and use like flex time or anything like that if the start of the audio regions is not exactly the same. Just a random little tip there for you. All right, this is getting pretty cool. A lot of channels here. Canceling down 133 channels into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stems at the moment. So we've got 7 track stacks, ultimately 7 stems for your song at the moment, but 133 channels made so far. Getting pretty crazy here. And that's the beauty of this, like getting it all organized, track stack like this, you can just close everything down and you have complete control over all of this stuff at the moment with just 7 channels. Pretty awesome. So while we're kind of doing these rootsy and country sort of sounds, I'm going to add some slide guitar channels as well. So exactly the same thing, going to need 6 channels as if it's 2 mics on a guitar amp, and then the DI signal as well. All right, that's looking good. So let's add some keys. Let's just assume that maybe someone's going to bring in a keyboard and we're going to record some audio straight out of it, but let's also set up some MIDI channels as well. So we're recording a keyboard, or if you're miking up a piano, you're probably going to want at least 2 channels per recording. So you can do stereo miking, or you can do stereo outs of a keyboard. So let's make 4 keys channels. So 2 channels per, so 4 times 2, 8. So I'm just going to call them keys so that we don't have to be like name specific. If you write piano, then you kind of think of a piano sound. If you write keys, It can be anything. All right, let's give these a nice keys picture. And then we're going to pan these left and right as if they're a stereo configuration. And then we will make a bus for each of these pairs. Give these a nice dark green color. Give these a slightly lighter green color. All right, create track, drag these up above our keys. You know what, let's change the picture. I don't like this. Boom, I like that. On our keys, let's just add a send for potential reverb. Even maybe some parallel compression always sounds pretty good on keys as well. And let's create a couple of MIDI options here. So MIDI, just create one MIDI track. You can easily duplicate these. We will have a electric piano. Electric piano is cool. And we will also have a piano. We'll just go with the Steinway. And let's grab an organ, just like a top end organ. I mean, you just want to come through and pick a sound anyway when you start using this stuff, but just to have it kind of ready to roll. And we'll also grab a synth sound. Like we can have a pad sound, get that in there, keys, pad, organ, electric piano, just a couple of things that you kind of reach for regularly if you're kind of just crafting songs. So getting a couple of ideas in there, ready to go. This is like keys and synth sort of sounds here. So all of our piano kind of sounds in this one track stack. And you can just keep adding to it as you need. But let's just have a couple of sounds here just to get the ball rolling. And when you make a MIDI instrument in Logic, it already makes sends and effects. So some of these are okay, like they're not too bad. And what we might do is kind of utilize these a little bit, and we will create track. So we'll highlight all of those effects that it's made, and then these will be a part of our keys track stack. If you turn that track stack down, all you're trying to do is turn down the sound of how everything is. So you want to make sure those delays and reverbs come down with all the sounds as well. So that's why I'm chucking it in there. Okay, so let's click on this all the way up to the top of our keys comp, and then hit create track. Okay, let's just label this keys and synth. Let's drag all this MIDI stuff up to the top because you're probably more likely to use that than actually tracking keys. Some of you might have a lot of like synthesizers and keyboards that you actually track back in. So this is where this will be handy. Let's just put all of these effects up the top here as well. And then let's just change them to the same color as our other effect sends. So that's the best way that we can kind of keep this tidy and all in the track stack all together, so that when you solo this, you're hearing everything keys related, all of the effects, everything. And when you mute that, everything gets muted. And when you turn this up and down, everything goes up and down. All the effect sends are in here now. So I feel like in this, we've got enough kind of effects and sends going on that we probably don't need one on here, but let's just chuck one on here anyway. Why not? So this will be our keys verb. So if we want an overall reverb or delay, whatever you want to chuck on here, you can chuck a reverb or a delay or both, or any kind of effect, and you can affect the whole bus. So it's probably good to just have one effect send on there. See if you want to like muck around with that. But let's say you have like some sounds that you like to use, they're part of a regular part of your workflow, then just come in here, hit plus, create that MIDI instrument. So you can see it's popped it down the bottom here. All you have to do is drag it up into the folder, and it will now be part of that track stack. The only other thing though you'll have to check is if it has made effect sends that aren't part of the track stack. You can see we've got 66 and 67, and we can see that those are part of this 66, 67. So they're already included. But if it made sends that weren't part of it, you just do the same thing, come over here, right click them, and then create track, and then drag them into the track stack. Okay, now we're going to create some strings. So we'll include some MIDI strings and then also some audio files in case you're actually tracking strings, or if you're going to get a session player, you can just drag and drop them into this folder and have all your strings in one location. Okay, so let's just go studio strings. I'm going to do studio cellos. So we're going to set up the whole family here. Okay, we'll come into orchestral strings and we'll do a string ensemble as well. So you see Logic sort of shares effect sends. It's sort of sending a bunch of all this stuff to the same sends, which we now have in our keys and synth folder over here. But I'm going to change these and make our own effect sends for these. Okay, so we've got a string ensemble. So if you just want to kind of like have all the strings at once, you can kind of just get that going on a keyboard. But then you can split things off into separate groups as well if you want to get a bit creative. And so you can come through and change these to whatever strings library you like to use, get them separated out like we have here. You can add extras if you want, but that's a good starting point. So let's just add a couple of audio tracks in case we want to track strings, or in case we're going to drop in some session played strings that are delivered to us. Let's just have some stuff here ready to go. So we'll keep the labels kind of vague. We'll just go strings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just a couple of options there. Now, group all these together. Boom, done. And we will make a send off of our strings track stack as well. So string haul, str. And yeah, I'd put like a haul or maybe a nice sounding plate on there. Strings, let's color these, tidy up this mess. I'm feeling like making these purple. Okay, and we'll make our own little send in here as well off of these. So just another option for reverbs in there. You can add another verb there if you don't want to use any of these ones that were kind of pre-designated in Logic. Now I better come back to our keys and add a couple of groups onto these. Gets a bit tricky when you start adding MIDI to the mix of things. Might make our MIDI strings a bit of a darker purple. All right, gosh, we've got a lot going on here. This is pretty thorough. All right, so we've got drums, bass, guitars, lead guitars, acoustic guitars, banjo, mandolin, slide guitar, keys and synth, strings. Maybe we need to add some vocal tracks now. So there's gonna be a fair bit here as well. Let's do 4 lead vocal tracks. And then we're gonna have a double track, a center double track, double left and double right. And then we'll double that as well, double left, double right. So we've got 9 tracks there. So this is gonna be like our main vocals. So 9 tracks. We'll call this LVOC 1. This will be double center, double left, double right, double left 2, double right 2. Make another double as well. Double center 2. Okay, it's always good to have plenty of tracks ready to go. Yellow is usually my go-to for vocals. Okay, so for the double left, we'll pan it left, double right, pan it right. Just kind of basically have that stuff sort of set up a little bit. Now let's group all of this stuff together. This could be like lead voc. Chuck that up there. Now let's make some harmony layers. So we'll do the same thing. We'll have 2 center mono tracks, and then we'll have 2 pairs of panned out double tracks. So all up 6 tracks here. So we'll call this harm center 2, and then harm left, harm right, harm left 2, harm right 2. Give them a nice little picture. Make these ones orange. You know what? Let's make another layer, because sometimes people go nuts with the harmonies. So 3. Okay, so we've got our mono harmony tracks. We've got 3 sets of double tracks for harmonies left and right. And let's send these to a bus. We'll call this harmony. And then right click, create track. And let's drag this up above our harmonies. So this is going to give us like ultimate control over our harmonies. We can still kind of mix our harmonies and do what we want with them. And then this will be kind of like our master volume. We can put processing on it as well. But it's also good just to be able to grab all your harmonies and then just be able to turn them up or down at will. So let's pan these out as well. Might not necessarily hard pan them, but we'll just hard pan them for this, and then you can obviously bring them in to wherever you want. So this looks pretty cool. Okay, so let's create a couple of extra sends now off our lead vocal and off our harmony track. Now I'm just putting these effect sends on our lead vocal group and on our harmony group. Not really going to go into putting individualized effect sends on the individual vocals. Because we have these sort of separated into lead and harmony, that's enough separation to be able to like put a throw delay on this. It's not going to matter if it gets on the double track at the same time. And if that did bother you, you could just add a send off your individual track. Now I've created 4 sends, and we're going to have a plate, might have a haul, some slap, we have an 1/8 delay, might grab one more, maybe like a 1/4 delay. And these are the typical kind of effects that I reach for on vocals. Plate, haul, slap delay, like a short 1/8 note delay to fill some space, 1/4 delay. These are all the kind of things that I would typically go for. So let's highlight these, create track, and then we're gonna put these at the top. And you know, you can change this if you want. If you're like, I'd prefer to have the effects at the bottom, you can put them at the bottom. Whatever feels best to your workflow. Now we just gotta change the color of our lead vocal group and our harmony group. Dark orange looks pretty good. They were the same color as the effects then, so we don't want that. Might even add one more, and we'll do a saturation for our vocals too. And that really depends. You may want to add saturation individually to your vocals, or you may want to do it as a group thing and just get all the vocals running to some saturation. Now we're going to highlight all of these, create a track stack. Vocals. All right, this looks good. Okay, so now let's set up some backing vocals. This one's going to be pretty simple. We might just make kind of like 10 tracks here. So plus 10 audio tracks. Highlight all of these, hold down Shift and click on the first one. BGV, backing vocal, and 10 backing vocals. Just give this like a microphone picture. Just make these kind of like a pinky purple color. Now what we're gonna do is create a bus, BGVs, create track, drag that up the top, and then we'll add another send. Call this one BV verb, create track and drag that up the top. And then let's just create a track stack out of all of this stuff. Label this one BGVs, backing vocals. Now the reason I kind of set it up like this is we have all of our individual backing vocals, and then we've got our group, and then we can send it to some reverb here, and then we have the overall master control of our backing vocals here. So you can process the group and then do the reverb post, and then we can still have this as like an extra volume fader just to balance things out later. Backing vocals can be anything from like oohs or like call and response lines, echoes, like just anything extra that vocalists want to add in to create a little bit of extra interest in the mix. So you generally need a fair few tracks. Even 10 tracks might not be enough, but they're pretty simple to just duplicate. So no special grouping or anything needed on these. So 10 should be fine for the template. Okay, and I'm going to create one more thing, and this is similar to backing vocals, but this is going to be our gang vocals, so like group vocal stuff. So it's pretty much going to be the same kind of setup. But for this one, we're going to do 16 channels, because usually when you do gang vocals, it's probably like a handful of people, and you do lots of tracks to create that big sound of like a massive group of people. So the more, the merrier, and usually it's like 10 plus. So I think about 16 channels will give us enough. Now, there's another reason why I'm trying to make the session in this way, where I'm putting effects and reverbs within the track stacks, is because when it comes time to potentially making stems from a session, it can be kind of annoying having all these different reverb sends that are kind of being used by multiple things, that then you have to sit there and individually export stems because you have to solo the track. Otherwise, you're going to end up with bits of everything in the reverbs. So this means essentially that if all of your sounds and all of your effects are within this group and you're not using any extra external sends, then you can render out this group in a single export. If all of your groups are like this and you're not using any external reverbs or anything like that, it means you could create a MIDI region on all of these things, because there has to be something there, it can't be blank. And so you could create MIDI regions across all your stems, and then you could come up and go File, Export, all tracks as audio files, and then it is going to export these stems with everything inside them. So you could just hit bang, go, and it's going to do it all in one go. But the trade-off is that you have to keep all of the effects and everything within your track stacks. If that doesn't make sense to you, then I apologize. I was kind of just like blitzing through that. So the idea is that you can just bounce out all these stems in one go and have everything isolated how it's meant to be, because we're keeping everything locked into those track stacks. But say if you were using the reverb sends off of these, then you'd be in a bit of trouble. You'd probably have to solo the sounds and export them that way. So not that that's a big deal to everyone, but for me, like I do get people asking for like mixed stems at the end of a project, and you know, it can just take a lot of time. So if I can kind of fine tune the way that I'm doing this so that that stuff is already simplified, then it's going to make things a lot easier for me to provide that stuff. Now there's only a couple of little things left to do, I think, but let's create a MIDI drum setup as well. So for the guys who are using MIDI at home, we're just going to set up a basic kind of thing with some MIDI drums here, but I'm probably going to do something a little bit more in depth a little bit later, and that would be focusing on using MIDI drums as our main thing. And sort of, it really depends on the MIDI drums that you're using as to how you can route it and how you can set it up. But for this, we're just going to use a Logic producer kit, which gives us a few more options with like overheads and room mics and stuff like that. And we're going to put it within our drum bus. So let's start by creating this. So MIDI instrument, And let's come down to drum kit, producer kits. Let's just do SoCal. Everyone loves SoCal. Okay, so we're just going to drag this up into our drums. And now we've got a track stack within a track stack. So we open that up and we can see all of the SoCal kit here. Now what we're going to do is just change some of these outputs. So our kick and our kick out, let's send these to our kick sum. And then the same with the snare. Let's send that to our snare bus. Same with the toms. Send our rooms to our room bus. And our overhead to our overheads bus. Now anything that's remaining is going to be going through this bus here, which isn't really a problem, but what we want to do is take off this processing. So I might just bypass it for now because we're going to have processing on the drum bus here. This will be where we're doing any EQ and compression on the drum kit as a whole. Okay, I don't have this set up to be able to play any audio out of the session at the moment because I wasn't really planning on playing anything back out of Logic for this video. But what I'll do is just kind of play this so you can see what's happening here. You know, you might be able to hear it in my mic if I crank these monitors up. It is raining again. So you can see we've got the kick and snare all routing to these locations. And then when we have our parallel processing, you can feed it into that and it's all kind of set up for you and you can treat it the same as what we're doing with the acoustic drums. And if you are using MIDI drums, then you could just come through and delete all of the kick mics and it won't affect anything. You know, you can come in, grab all of these, delete them, and then we're just left with all of our buses. You know, you can drag all your kicks, snares and stuff up here. So you can still do all your processing on the individual channels, or you can process on the groups and then you can send them into any parallel processing that you want to set up, as well as any of the reverb sends that we've got for the snare and the toms. So you can still use all the tracks that we've set up here and get the same results. So what I'll do for this template is I'll leave that SoCal kit there, and then you can use that as a bit of a guide for how to get these MIDI drums going within a sort of like a drum bus setup like we have here. Now my main concern is that if we change the kit, all the routing is going to disappear. So let's have a quick look at what happens if we change the drum kit. And I am right. So it does mess with that. But maybe if we change the kit up here, you can still go through and you can change all of the sounds in here and pick your toms and your snare. That's maybe the better way of doing it. Otherwise, every time you click on that kit, you're going to have to re-establish the routing, which is kind of annoying. So if you're going to change things up, just open up the drum kit MIDI, have a look through the sounds. Ooh, Stadium's cool. But that would be my way of going about it. And you could do the exact same thing with any of your other instruments. Like if you're running something through Contact with multiple outs, you could do the exact same thing. Feed it into the groups, or if you want to, you could just send it to the parallel processing directly from your channels that are coming out of Contact or out of, you know, Slate Digital Drums or Superior Drummer 3. Like they're all very similar, but it's just a matter of getting those multiple outs and then routing them in a similar way that we have done here with the Logic Drummer. Or else just do all of your parallel sends directly off of these and keep it simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it like we've done here with like kick sums and snare sums. It's just nice to have a lot of control, which is what I've tried to achieve here with this kind of setup. You can blend everything and then you can have the ultimate control over your snare blend, especially like if you're using acoustic drums, you can then add in like triggers as well, and everything's coming to a single location where you can EQ it, compress it, control the volume of it. It's just nice to have that all packaged up like that. The MIDI thing is a little tricky. I've sort of sat here racking my brain about how to best set this up for, you know, general users, but depending on the software and the kit you're using, you may want to set it up a little differently. But this is how I would integrate it into this template. And, you know, let's just rename this to MIDI drums. I'm going to get rid of this processing on the bus. Okay, so now we need to set up a mix bus. So let's get this sorted. Now we're going to set up two buses here. We're going to set up an instrument bus and we're going to set up a vocal bus. So we're going to grab all of our instruments, all of our instrument reverbs, and change these to bus 92. Now we're going to call this Ints Mix. Now we're going to grab all of our vocals, and if you've got any vocal effect sends, grab those as well. Go to the next bus and call it Voc Mix. I like to color these channels red, just like nice and bright. And then we're going to change the output of these to the next bus along, bus 95. And this is going to be our final mix bus. And then we're going to go one more step further along from that, and this will be our master. So if you are mastering within the same session, you can apply your master processing here and your mix bus processing here. Generally not totally recommended, but you know, people do it. So let's just get it in here. Let's make the master a nice bright blue. Okay, so that means we can kind of process all of our instruments and not affect our vocals. And then we can have our vocals over here and we can kind of get the level right, do any final processing, EQ, compression to the whole thing, and then we can meet them all up together at the mix bus, and that's where we can apply maybe some final like compression, maybe a little bit of EQ, and concentrate on the overall sound of the mix here with a bit of processing. And then mastering, obviously, just like the final icing on the cake, just like get it nice and loud, give it a little bit of a polish, get it ready for release. Now I realized I forgot something important, just like some basic percussion layers. I'm always needing like shakers and tambourine layers. So let's add a couple of extra tracks to our drum bus. So let's just duplicate this room mono mic, all right, and turn off this group on it. Okay, so this will be shaker 1, shaker 2, tambo 1, tambo 2. So always good to have shaker and tambourine tracks ready to go. And typically I like to keep these in the drum bus and make it kind of all part of the drum sound. We'll just give these like a light purple color. We're up to 254 channels. So it's pretty heavy. There's a lot in here. So obviously whatever you don't need, you just, when you open up the template, you can make a decision and you can just delete it and clear a bit of space if you feel like there's just too much stuff in here. And I'm going to make one more folder here, and this is just going to be for like pop elements, just if you're adding like sample stuff or adding like sweep sounds or like whips or like finger snaps, stuff like that. This is going to be like an effects percussion kind of folder. So we'll just have about 10 tracks in this, and we'll just label this effects. I'm not going to do anything crazy with this, just make a track stack, effects / percussion. Just give it like a little speaker picture, maybe like a nice light blue color. Now, generally with this kind of thing, I usually like to put it up next to drums. I like to have this folder kind of around here, and then I'll layer in all of this extra drum kind of stuff that I don't necessarily want to have in my drum bus. So yeah, that can be like rises, noise sweeps, bass drops, like all that kind of little fun effect stuff to really like hype up a track. Now, one more thing, there's always one more thing. We need to make sure we have the click. So let's go into our mixer window and click on all. Oh, this is all our tracks, crazy madness. Now here it is, click. Okay, let's right click on this, create track. And now we've got our metronome in the global window. Let's just drag this up the top. I like to change this to the little metronome picture, and there we go. So we can have our click easily accessible. You can drag it down and up. You can automate it if you need to, if you want to make it quieter in a section. So, you know, you might be tracking a song and then it gets to a soft finger pick section on an acoustic guitar and you just can't have the click super loud, but you don't want to be sitting here riding it up and down. You can press A and automate the volume and, you know, make your life a little bit easier. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much done with this. I'm pretty happy with everything we've got going on here, all the routing. Like, this covers pretty much most of what I need to do from day to day, which is pretty cool. And you can always then bring in mixing projects and you can drag your files in and line them up with this sort of session. And, you know, it might speed up your workflow as opposed to kind of setting this stuff up from scratch every time you mix a song. This might be a game changer. So if I think of anything extra between now and when this video goes live, I'll add it into the mix template and you'll find it on the store. I think this is pretty cool. And yeah, hopefully this helps a lot of people out. Like, this is kind of hard to set up. This took quite a while to actually sit here and do. So a couple of bucks to kind of grab something like this is actually pretty good. So take advantage of that. Head over to the store, grab a copy of this if you want a very thorough session / mixing template. Otherwise, for anyone who's not using Logic, hopefully you can kind of follow along and set up a similar kind of thing within your session and cover a lot of your needs. And then obviously, whatever you don't need, you can just select it and say, see you later, and that will be gone. And then you can start working on your session. Thanks heaps for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to support the channel, make sure you go and grab a copy of this template, but also check out my range of drum samples and mix courses on my website as well as any of the affiliate links below. If you buy your gear through Sweetwater, check out that Sweetwater affiliate link. Anything you buy over there kicks back a small commission to the channel. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but it shows you support. If you're keen to keep improving your mixing skills, maybe check out this pop country mix course that I put together, see if it's something that might interest you.